Assets have been a fairly consistent element in most Grand Theft Auto games ever since they were first introduced in Vice City all the way back in 2002. Now, you might say that the title and premise of this video don't really make any sense, especially since the latest installment in the franchise as of making this video, GTA 5, and also its very popular and still played to this day online mode, which combined together have brought and still bring in billions of dollars every single year since they were released. Both include properties that can be bought, as well as garages, helipads, docks, and even airport hangars. All of which can be purchased with your hard-earned money, so why would I make such a weird and nonsensical statement? Well, despite the single player of GTA 5 having quite a significant number of assets to buy, and that's what I'm gonna focus on because I don't play much of the online component, they don't really compare to the earlier games in the franchise, with two of them specifically that really managed to make them fun to engage with and even fuse them with their respective storylines. I'm of course talking about Vice City, which, like I said previously, was the first in the franchise to introduce this mechanic, and its prequel, Vice City Stories, which took the OG formula from 2002 and added on a few extra gimmicks borrowed from another game that made it stand out and actually brought a lot of replaying value to the game. That being the Empire building system. And it's not just these two that had an entire system of buying properties and doing various jobs for them, or serve a real purpose besides just being an icon on the map or a place to save your game. But let's talk about them all in order. Starting off with the game that first introduced this mechanic, Vice City's storyline heavily relies on it as part of its attempt of recreating and paying homage to Scarface, the movie that heavily, and I mean heavily, influenced this game. For those who haven't seen it, you're really missing out. But in essence, this is the story of Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee that arrives in America and begins to work for various gangsters in an attempt to make a name for himself and earn millions. And he gets a pretty successful operation going for himself halfway into the movie. But in order to operate whilst remaining under the radar, he purchases various legitimate businesses from around Miami to use them as fronts and launder the not so legitimate earned money from his not so legitimate businesses. And that's pretty similar to what our boy Tommy does as well. After taking out Diaz and claiming his mansion, Tommy begins his quest to earn money as he's heavily out of pocket and in debt to Sonny Forelli, who's constantly breathing down his neck and warning him through various phone calls.
I've been busy trying to sort things out. You didn't give me a lot of support down here, Sonny.
Oh, my fault, is it? Well, I've heard you've been busy, all right. Busy killing drug barons, busy taking over. Don't forget about us, Tommy, because I can assure you, I ain't forgotten about you.
So during the mission shakedown, we're tasked with busting window shops in the North Point Mall to scare local businesses, which finally enables the player to purchase assets, whereas previously you could only buy safe houses around the map, which are also a thing that I didn't mention before. Although the assets that we buy and work for pay us protection money, and only one of those assets truly serves as a front, that being the Cherry Poppers ice cream factory, which is used to distribute other non-dairy products. So our boy Tommy runs a huge protection racket for the main businesses that can be bought around the city. Including the Vercetti Mansion, there's a total of 9 assets around the map, and in order to progress to the third act of the game, where Sonny Forelli comes down south to personally check on Tommy's business and get the money back that he's owed, the player needs to purchase and complete the missions of at least 7. 2 of them are mandatory, those being the mansion itself and Printworks, but the rest are totally up to you. And you can obviously complete them in whatever order you want, and then use the money that you constantly earn every in-game day to fund the purchase of your next asset. And I find this to be really cool, because it actually makes you feel like you're building an empire, and you're allowed to run free and tackle each asset whenever you want without needing to follow a strict path. And of course, if you want to complete all missions or even go for the 100% game completion, you're gonna need to do all of the assets anyway. But if you're in it for just the story alone, you get the liberty to choose part of your adventure. I'm sure that not everyone is gonna be a fan of this huge non-linear chunk in the middle of the story, where you aren't told specifically what to do in order to progress, as the game doesn't tell you that you need to complete 7 assets in order to unlock the final 2 missions. It also doesn't tell you where they are located on the map, so if it's your first time playing, you're not gonna know where to look for them. And most importantly, there's no way for the player to know that the Printworks asset is mandatory for the game to progress. So someone playing for the first time might decide to skip it, complete all other 8, and then wonder why they can't progress. And that's the fault of the developers. So yeah, it isn't the perfect system in the entire world, especially if you don't know all the gimmicks and tricks to this mechanic, but once you're somewhat familiar with the game, you can overlook these errors and truly appreciate what Rockstar tried to do all the way back in 2002. Before directly going into VCS, which also had a similar but modified game mechanic, let's also quickly go over all the other games that had something similar to this system. San Andreas also features a lot of save houses spread across the entire map, but it also featured proper assets that you could buy and do missions for, similar to Vice City, both of them located in San Fierro, one being Zero's RC shop, and I don't think I need to add much more here. I understand how difficult supply lines seemed to be back when I was a kid. I too struggled with that, although his final mission, New Model Army, was even more difficult, at least for me. Although the cutscenes of these missions and the interactions between Zero and CJ make up for the difficulty I had to endure all those years ago.
I said go away, Carl. I don't need any friends today. Thank you.
Man, them some pretty strong draws.
And the other one available in San Fierro is the Wang Cars, which is a car showroom located next to the Doherty garage. This one, however, requires for the player to complete the driving school first before being able to purchase it, which isn't the hardest of tasks. After that, you can do a set of 4 missions, all which are pretty interesting and somewhat unique. And what's even cooler is that after you complete these missions, you unlock the import-export crane, which gives you a couple lists of cars that need to be brought to the docks and loaded onto the nearby ship. There's also the Verdant Meadows airstrip if you count that, which unlock the famously known flight school. Besides the airstrip, the other 2 can be totally ignored, and you can complete the main storyline just fine. However, they are part of the lore, and even though Zero's voice can be really annoying at times, they are actually quite fun, and even reward you with cool features or even secret minigames you probably didn't know about, like Beefy Baron, which is basically an extension of supply lines. Moving on, Liberty City Stories, much like GTA 3, didn't feature any assets that could be bought and do missions for, although it would have worked pretty fine lore-wise, as they could just be fronts for the Leonis, with Tony managing them. But despite there not being actual properties to spend money on and purchase, there are various places you can do missions for and then acquire as assets, like the Punk Noodle Shop or the Capital Autos showroom in Heartwood. So they didn't completely strip away this mechanic. And San Andreas had a few of these as well. Now, going into Vice City Stories, I've already dedicated an entire video to it where I also go over the Empire building system. But in short, it's a mixture between Vice City's way of buying an asset and doing missions and San Andreas' gang war system. But in this case, you get to choose your type of business from a list of 6 and choose between 3 sizes: small, medium, or high roller. And you are required to take over and protect a chunk of them from a total of 30 around the map in order to progress at certain points in the story. The San Andreas-y part comes when you need to protect these empires from various attacks coming in from rival gangs trying to take them back. And that's where a lot of people also remember the struggle of keeping up with the game, as you're constantly attacked during free roam, and they almost always are on the opposite end of the map, which also doesn't make the system perfect, but back when I first played VCS, it blew my mind. And I enjoyed more than even the one in the original Vice City, mostly because of the challenging and sometimes rather annoying managing aspect, where you actively need to protect them in order not to lose them, and also the ability to choose the type of business to run and the size, which basically gives you total control. If this doesn't give you a real sense of progression, I don't know what will. Another game I also need to briefly touch upon is Chinatown Wars, which also featured save houses, but they served as much more than just places to save your progress. They also acted as spots to hide your stash of highly illegal substances, which plays a key role in the controversial drug dealing minigame that this game had, which is another great use of these properties. And finally, GTA 5 did feature properties to purchase, and quite a lot of them, more than even Vice City, split somewhat evenly amongst the 3 protagonists, and some of them cost absolutely insane prices, like the golf course, which is $150 million. But despite the insane stock market grind that you're gonna need to do in order to afford the golf course and the other assets that you can purchase in this game, they lack the same excitement and element of progression that the 3D era games had. These properties do earn you some money, but if you can afford them all, you probably don't need it anyway. and despite there being some missions you can do for them, they aren't as interesting because they don't have any ties to the storyline. Not to mention that if you go on a shopping spree and purchase too many assets in a short span of time, you're gonna lock yourself out of these missions anyway, which are triggered via phone calls. The game does hint these assets at some point during the story, but they aren't required at all in order to progress, so there's no real incentive for the player to acquire them anyway. And I know that 5's story is revolved around heists and not building an empire, so the properties don't need to be involved in there. But I think Rockstar could have found a way for at least one protagonist to go on an empire building arc for whatever reason. It would have definitely made these assets matter more. Some of that was fixed in online, where these properties are tied to the heist you can do and the continuation of the HD universe lore. But again, I don't play much of the online mode, so I can't really speak on it. But for the single player, which I'm focusing on, I think there's ways to expand on what VC and VCS did 2 decades ago. And GTA 6 might be the one that does just that. During the leaks from 2 years ago, there were hints of potential businesses that could act as fronts for our dirty money, featuring a washing machine as an icon. And if it's anything similar to what we got in the 3-era games, I'm all here for it. But considering the fact that Rockstar wants to create the biggest and greatest game of all time, I'm thinking they might aim higher than just bringing back a mechanic the same way they did 20 years ago. There's a lot of things that could be implemented and re-implemented, like having to buy certain businesses to progress the story, but have the freedom of choosing what properties to buy, how big they are, maybe even the venture that goes behind closed curtains, with higher risk rackets getting us more money, but also making the missions tied to them more difficult and prone to cops trying to set us up. Also, since there's 2 protagonists and they're also a couple, the business and the jobs you can do for them could be shared instead of separate. Basically Bonnie and Clyde meets Scarface, which would be a mix between certain features of nearly every GTA game so far. Maybe I'm dreaming too much, but I would love for something like the assets or empire building system of the earlier games to return in some form to GTA 6. Even if it's a simple copy-paste, I'd still be satisfied. But Rockstar does innovate, so if something like this does get implemented, I would expect more from them. But who really knows? We'll know when the game is out for good. But what do you think? Would you like it if VC or VCS's asset management found their way into GTA 6? Or do you think they don't really belong in this? Let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're there, also leave a like. And of course, consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.